Dear students, today we will be discussing about one more important topic in your Unit 4 of the Public International Law syllabus, that is extradition. Extradition has been a very sensitive and a political issue at the international arena. And recently, you might have noticed there are so many discussions were happening regarding extradition of Vijay Mallya and also Nirav Modi from England to India. Earlier, also we had a discussion, especially at the international level. There were a lot of discussions on one more person whose whose picture has been there on the slide. That is of Julian Assange, who is known to be the founder of this WikiLeaks and who has been guilty or who has been alleged to have leaked most of the sensitive secret documents of US military and also key documents of other nations. So US wants him to be extradited, but he surrendered to the police of UK and ultimately he lost a case and he got a refuge in a refuge or what we say extraterritorial asylum in this Ecuador embassy. Subsequently, he was that asylum was withdrawn and ultimately he was now in the jail of Britain. So extradition is a very sensitive issue and also a sensational issue at the international level. Let us try to understand the legal aspects of this extradition and what international law tells about it and what is the law which regulates extradition in detail in today's session. So we will have a brief overview of the whole topic in your examination. They will be generally asking it as a short notes question, and some cases even they may ask some problems. So these are few important things which all of us must know. So first of all, let us try to have an overview of what we are going to study in this session. First one is meaning of extradition. We'll be discussing in detail. Going further, it is a theoretical basis of concept of extradition. Why a person needs to be extradited? What were the principles or belief system which is prevalent at the international level which makes extradition a possibility? And third one is nature of obligation of state to extradite. Whether under international law is there any obligation on the states to extradite a person or not to extradite a person? What is the practice of different nations in this regard will also be studied in brief. And finally is going to be the law governing extradition. What is the law? Do you find a law at the international level or we will find laws at the municipal level as to decide whether someone has to be extradited or not? That will be looked into. And finally, the conditions for extradition. If a person to be extradited, what are the essential conditions to be satisfied in general with respect to extradition? So this is the broad outline on the topic extradition. We'll be discussing each and every one of those points in detail in the coming slides. Okay, moving further is the meaning of extradition. So for us to understand the concept of extradition, first of all we should know it is a process, or to be more appropriate, it is going to be a transactional aspect. It is going to be a transaction. Of course, there may not be any consideration. It is not it's a transaction just like a contract. No, it is not like that. There are many political colors are going to be there. There are so many other pulls and pressures, so many things will be involved. So let us try to understand what is this meaning of extradition is all about. It's a process. It is a process between two states. Which are those two states? Generally we are going to call them as requesting states and state of refuge. So what is the meaning of requesting state and what is the meaning of state of refuge? The name itself suggests a requesting state is a state which wants a person to be extradited by another state. So the state which makes a request that someone is to be extradited is called as a requesting state, and the state of refuge is the state where a person has got refuge or protection or a person where he was found. So these are the two states which are involved in every extradition: requesting state and state of refuge. So what they do? So what this process involves? It involves surrender of a person by the state of refuge to the requesting state. So this is what is going to be the process. So the process is it involves surrender. One person is going to be surrendered. By whom? By the state of refuge. As I said, the state where he is found, or the state where he has got a protection from that state. There is going to be a surrender of that person to the state which is requesting for his custody, or request him to be uh, taken over, or what we may say, whom they want to arrest and to initiate legal proceeding. So that is the second and important element. It is a process between requesting state and state of refuge, and it is a process by which one person is going to be surrendered by the state of refuge to the requesting state. So what is going to be done, and to whom it is going to be done, at whose instant it is going to be done? So surrender is always at the request of the requesting state, usually until and unless a state request for a person's custody or possession. Usually there is not going to be any extradition as such. So surrender is at the request of the requesting state. Then the process will start, and further, the person to be surrendered, whom you have to surrender, or what is the basis for such a surrendering or handing over a person by one state to another state? The basis is that the person in question who has to be surrendered, he is accused or who has already been convicted of an offense. So there is no rule that only convicted person to be surrendered. There is no rule. Even accused or a convicted person, they can be the subject matter of extradition. So that is the one more important aspect. A person to be surrendered or extradited is accused or convicted of an offense, and further, offense is by way of violation of the law of the state which has been requesting extradition. So that is the basis. So further, what is the position is that requesting state is competent as per the international standards or international practices and as per the municipal laws. So requesting state, whichever state is requesting, is competent. It has some interest. It has some power to try to conduct trial. The person required to be extradited for the alleged offense, whatever the offense which he has committed. We already discussed the concept of state jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction as such in our unit 2. So a state should have jurisdiction, or it should be competent as per the principles of international law, whereby that person can be tried and can be punished by the requesting state for the offenses which he has committed, or the offenses which that person is alleged to have been committed. So this whole process of surrender of such a person from the state of refuge to requesting state, this process in those circumstances is called as the extradition. So this is the sense in which the word extradition is being used. Okay, moving further is a theoretical basis of concept of extradition. Why there is a need to extradite? If a person has escaped from one state to another state, obviously that person has not committed any offense in the state where he has got the refuge or where he now resides. So still he needs to be extradited because he has violated a law in the law of the state which has been requesting for extradition. As far as we are concerned, our laws are not broken. He has not committed any wrong to us. He has not created any problem for us. Still, why he needs to be extradited? Why such a practice has developed at the international level? These are few theoretical bases or justifications to have a concept called extradition. What are they? First one is offender must be punished irrespective of the place a person has committed an offense, irrespective of the nationals who have been affected by the offense. If a person has committed an offender must be punished. By whom? Generally by the state of refuge. Wherever he is found, if at all there is possibility, that state should also punish the offender, irrespective of the place he committed the offense. Offender must be punished by the state. If it is not possible, if the place where he is found, he cannot be punished by the that state, then what it has to be done? It has to be he has to be surrendered. The person who has committed an offense has to be surrendered to the state which can and will punish them. Once a person is if there is a proof and if there is a prima facie case and that a person has committed an offense, then he has to be tried, and if it is proved that he has committed an offense, he has to be punished. So who has to punish? Generally the state which has uh, been affected by the ill acts of that person. So therefore, if at all the state which has given giving refuge, it is capable, or it is willing, or it wants to punish that person, it's okay, he can punish. Even the state of refuge itself can punish him. Or if at all they don't want, or we will be discussing in the further slides or further points in future points, if at all because of some technical reasons the state where he is found is not in a position to punish that person, then such a state has to surrender that person to the state which can and which will punish him because he has committed a wrong. Therefore, because no offender should go unpunished. That is the theoretical basis of the concept of extradition. And if the state refuge cannot prosecute or punish an offender due to technical rules, extradition can be an option. As I said, the state where he is found could not be punished because of the technicalities of those laws of that nation. Then at least it should take steps to ensure that he has to be extradited to the country where he has actually committed an offense and which the state is willing to punish. So, state on whose territory the crime has been committed is best able to try the offender or to punish him. This is one more theoretical aspect. Whether it is going to actually happen or not, it's a different issue. Ideally, this is the position. What is that? State on whose territory the crime has been committed is best able to try the offender. It has its own reasons. Why it is so? There are reasons for this. First one is evidence is more freely available there. If a person has committed an offense here, and if he is now found in some other part of the globe, definitely that state you may not find most of the evidences are to be collected in the place where the offense has been committed. So therefore evidence is more freely available in that country where he has committed an offense. That's the reason. Second one is state has the state whose laws are violated, that state has the greatest interest in the punishment of the offender. This is one more reason as to why it has to be that person has to be extradited to the country where he has committed an offense. And further, greatest facilities for ascertaining the truth can also be found in that state where he has committed an offense, and that is the truth. Greatest facilities are also available in the place where he has committed an offense, so that we can clearly ascertain the truth of the allegations, if at all any such cases are there. Finally, there is therefore it is right and proper. Because of all the above reasons, the concept of extradition has become popular. Therefore, it is the right and proper to surrender the criminal to the territorial state where the offense has been committed. Based on all these reasons, so there has been a practice at the international level that states are going to surrender a person whom they found in their own state, in their own territory, to the state, and who has been guilty or has been accused of committing crimes, to the state where he has committed such an offense. So this is with respect to the theoretical basis of the concept of extradition. Moving further, laws governing the extradition. Do we find an international treaty or customary international law as to who has to be extradited, who should not be extradited, when a person has to be extradited? In this regard, we don't find. This is at the outset, I would like to make it clear that there is no general rules and regulations governing extradition at the international level. So we don't find laws governing extradition at the international level in the form of treaties and customs. Then, then how it is going to be done? It is entirely based on bilateral treaties. We don't find a law-making treaties as such, as we discussed in our unit 1 and 2 regarding sources of law. We don't find a general treaties or law-making treaties applicable to every nation, saying that yes, these categories of people are to be extradited and these categories of people should not be extradited, and this is the procedure. No, we don't find any such thing and at the international level. So what is the law? Extradition is dealt. The whole process of extradition is dealt by bilateral treaties between the requesting state and the state of refuge. That is the most important position thing which we should know. Further, nations neither have a duty to surrender nor duty to not to surrender. Let us take the example of Vijay Mallya or Nirav Modi. So British government or Britain as such has no duty under international law to surrender Vijay Mallya to India or Nirav Modi. If they want, they can. If they don't want, you cannot compel them to surrender. So nations neither have a duty to surrender nor duty not to surrender. Neither India can claim it as a matter of right to get Vijay Mallya, nor Vijay Mallya has a right not to be surrendered. Neither we nor he has any right under international law that to be extradited or not to be extradited. It is entirely a matter of the policy of the government where he is found. So nations neither have a duty to surrender nor a duty not to surrender unless there is a bilateral treaty which imposes an obligation. In spite of bilateral treaties, there are going to be a lot of conditions and lot of discretions are going to be given to the state of refuge to decide whether to extradite or not to extradite a particular person. So extradition is termed as an imperfect obligation. I think we have a discussion about the concept of imperfect rights in your jurisprudence when we are talking about kinds of rights, perfect and imperfect rights. A perfect right is a right which is both recognized and enforced. So right is recognized, and if there is violation of right, it is also going to be enforceable. Whereas imperfect rights are those rights which are recognized by law but which cannot be enforced. Similarly, if a serious crime has been committed and breach of international peace has been due to an act of a person, then we may feel that yes, the country where he has got the refuge has an obligation to extradite him. That obligation is imperfect. You cannot compel, you cannot enforce it, saying that I am going to file a case before International Court of Justice and needs to be extradited, or you cannot use any other means to compel a state to extradite him. There may be, so it is just an imperfect obligation which has been termed. In fact, it is less than an imperfect obligation. At least we discussed in our jurisprudence saying that past consideration is a valid consideration under contract as well as under jurisprudence, whereas it is not so in case of international law. So even we don't find it an obligation as such. It is obligation maybe under treaties, but even if there is a breach of treaties, you cannot enforce it by going to international forums and compel the state of refuge to expel or extradite a person who is in under its control. So extradition is termed as imperfect obligation. Personally, I feel even it is less than an imperfect obligation. So that's with respect to the laws governing. And further, absence of a treaty or statute. If there is no treaty or statute between one nation and another nation, and the state of refuge, and what we say, the state of refuge, if at all, is still willing to extradite a person to the requesting state, it is purely based on reciprocity or courtesy. Courtesy, not something which is legally binding or something which has to be which can be enforced. Courtesy, saying that yes, if you give the same privilege to us, I will also give the same privilege to you. If you are willing to extradite people whom you found in your territory and who are in need, whom we need, we will also cooperate with you. It's a matter of cooperation, it's a matter of reciprocity, it's a matter of courtesy than an obligation. So whenever a treaty comes, there is going to be an obligation again, but it cannot be termed as a perfect obligation. It's an imperfect obligation. So this is the way in which law at the international level governs the whole process of extradition, and municipal laws are to decide the grant of and procedure as to extradition. Whether Malia has to be extradited from England to India, whether Nirav Modi has to be extradited from England to India. So they have their own rules and regulations, English people. So you might have seen many petitions were moved by Malia as well as Nirav Modi before different courts of England. And in most of those proceedings, I think there has been reports that Vijay Mallya has lost his case and soon he is going to be handed over to Indian authorities. We don't know when it is going to happen, but it was entirely based on the British law, their own municipal laws to decide to grant the extradition and procedure as to extradition. What procedure has to be followed? We don't find the international law binding on every nation says these are the instances where extradition has to happen, or these are the procedures which are to be followed. We don't have any such rules at the international level. Then conditions for grant of extradition. When there is going to be extradition, generally there are two aspects which are to be fulfilled for extradition. First one is extraditable person. The person to be extradited is someone who could be extradited. What is this extraditable person means? Of course, we'll be discussing it in further details in the coming points. Next one is extradition crime. The person has been guilty or accused of committing. Not every offense is going to be extradited. There are few offenses which are going to be termed as fit case or fit to be extraditable crimes. Only if a person has been guilty or who has been accused of such crimes, there is possibility of extradition. Otherwise, no. But please note, it doesn't mean that the moment a person has been guilty or accused of committing an extraditable crime, it doesn't give any obligation on the part of the state of refuge to compulsory extradite. No, that is a basic requirement. If at all a person has to be extradited, basic condition to be fulfilled. But that doesn't mean that merely fulfill the basic conditions, the state requesting the extradition will not get a right. It's a matter of political expediency or convenience of the state of refuge, which decides the fate of a person whom the requesting state wants to be extradited. So let us see who is an extraditable person. An extraditable person is to generally to be of this category. Request is for surrender of its own nationals or national of a third state. What do you mean by this? Request is for, there's a typographical error. Request is for surrender of its own nationals. The state which is requesting for extradition, it can generally ask for extradition of such people who are its own nationals who have committed an offense in their territory and now he has escaped to some other state. They can be, and the requesting state can request for such people, or it can also request for surrender of nationals of a third state. What do you mean by this third state? Request is for surrender of a national of a third state. Third state means a state which is not the state where the person has found the refuge. Let us take an example. India is asking for extradition of someone who is from France who is now found in England. Now, this person is a national of which country? He is neither a national of the requesting state nor the national of the state of refuge, but he belongs to a third state, France. That is the sense in which the word third state has been used. Request is to surrender for of its own national, its own national means of the national of the requesting state or of the national of a third state and not of the national of the state of refuge. Why? Because generally this is the position. States usually refuse the extradition of their own nationals. State usually refuse to extradite its own nationals. Why? Because we already know under the extraterritorial jurisdiction of a state, that is, the state may assert its jurisdiction on the basis of nationality principles. We discussed it under the chapter state jurisdiction. The state may assert its jurisdiction on the basis of nationality and punish its citizens for crimes committed abroad. So because of this reason, state may say that yes, he has committed an offense in your country and he belongs to us. He is our national. So we will punish him in our own nation. We may not extradite him to you. Such a contention can definitely be taken, and that is the contention which most of the nations are going to take. They generally don't extradite its own nationals to some other state until unless there is going to be a specific treaty or such an obligation as such there. So this is not the hard and fast rule. It entirely depends on the state practices, which may not be uniform. Okay, so that's with respect to conditions for grant of recognition. First one, extraditable person. Second one is most important is thing is extradition crime. Not every offenses will be considered as fit for extradition. So what is the general practice? This is the general rule. Now I cannot say rule. This is the widely accepted views among most of the nations. It is the extradition crimes is the list of crimes in each bilateral extradition treaty what we find. Whenever treaties are made between two nations with respect to extradition, they may have listed the crimes which are fit for extradition. Only a person who is guilty or accused of committing these crimes which are in the list of the treaty listed in the treaty, only for them there can be extradition, no other crimes. And further, conviction for such crime may lead to certain minimum punishment. That is a yardstick. Maybe it's only such offenses which are punishable with so many years of imprisonment or such a kind of punishment will be the basis for extradition. Like that, they can agree. Then that crime becomes extradition crimes, or a crime which may lead to extradition. Okay, that is extradition crime, and states extradite only for serious crimes, not for all petty offenses. An ordinary case of theft that may not lead to extradition. State extradites only for serious crimes. Only for serious crimes. Offenses not subject to extradition. Again, not a general hard and fast rule, but general practice. That is, in general, following offenses are not subject to extradition. They are first one, political crimes, then military offenses like desertion, and finally religious offenses. These are termed as offenses which may not in general leads to extradition. What is political crime and what is the basis for deciding political crime? We'll be discussing military offenses like desertion. Desertion means, I hope you know that once I join army or any of the armed forces, there is a statutory period for which you have to render your service. You cannot say that for 2 years I render the service. Now I'm not comfortable with the army services in armed forces. I want to come back. You cannot. There is going to be statutory period. You have to complete the statutory period. Then only you can come. If at all you come before that, you will be forced to go back. You will be arrested and you will be taken back to the armed forces. So that is desertion is considered as an offense. Usually, a person who has been guilty of desertion, he won't be extradited. As let us assume a member of Indian armed forces, he felt bad and he don't want to continue in our Indian army. He escaped from India and he is now residing in UK, or he is residing in Australia. No, you can in such cases he is guilty of desertion. He may not be generally extradited. Further, religious offenses. Dalai Lama is an example who has been considered as a person who is guilty of religious offenses by spreading religion or talking divide. Allegations are there about him that he has been guilty of spreading hatred to the existing regime of China in Tibet based on religious basis. So like that, such are the those are the offenses which are not going to be accepted as a basis for extradition of a person by the state of refuge. So further, factors relevant while deciding the political crime. Which crime is going to be considered as a political crime? Generally, the motive of the crime is going to be taken into consideration, and circumstances of its commission. What are the circumstances in which a particular crime has been committed by a person will be taken into consideration. Specific offenses of treason or attempted treason. Offenses against state, what we discussed under our Indian Penal Code. So they are not termed as ordinary offenses. They will be considered as political crimes, and acts directed against political organizations, they are termed as political crimes which does not give rise to extradition in general. Let me give an example as we discussed earlier. So, most of the LTTE leaders who have been guilty of instigating violence in Sri Lanka, they got asylum or refuge in UK. They are considered as offenses of treason in Sri Lanka, but now they have got refuge in UK because the nature of offense they have committed, they are considered as political crimes, which are not generally going to be subject matter of extradition. So these are few important things which we should know as far as extradition is concerned. Okay, so with this we will conclude our session, and in the next session we'll be discussing about the concept of asylum and different kinds of asylum. We'll discuss that in the next class. Thanks to all of you.